edition of World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley reporting now back in Washington after a very interesting stay in Reykjavik, Iceland. And the news is from Iceland, the electrifying news that a demand has been raised by one of the leading political leaders of Iceland for a debt moratorium. This has been raised in the Althing, the Icelandic Parliament. It's a call for a debt moratorium, meaning a stop of payments, a payment freeze for an undetermined number of years against the British and the Dutch, who, with the support of the IMF and the World Bank, had been demanding at least $6 billion of extortion, of tribute, from the Icelanders to London and The Hague in the Ice Save affair. And, of course, this is being done with the strong support for the British and the Dutch from the International Monetary Fund, from the European Commission in Brussels, led by the dubious Portuguese demagogue Barroso, with the European Central Bank in the background. Now, the details are, this was Monday night, the 5th of October. There was a special emergency debate in the Icelandic Parliament to discuss the deteriorating economic and financial position of Iceland 1 year after the collapse of these three hot money offshore banks, Landsbanki, Kaupthing, and Glitnir. And the demand was raised by Birgitta Jonsdottir, that is Birgitta, Jonsdottir. It's pronounced Jonsdottir more or less, or Jonsdottir more in English. She has basically observed that Iceland is technically bankrupt, that a debt moratorium is on the agenda, should be imposed, and that Iceland ought to cease this payment. Birgitta Jonsdottir also pointed to the overwhelming hostility against the Icelanders of the International Monetary Fund and the European Union. Now, there will be further details of this as we get the speech, the transcript, which is being obtained and will be made available in English as soon as possible. We'll be posting that around the world. This is the shot heard around the world. This is the first time in recent years that a European country has raised the question of the debt moratorium. Now, this debate had been called by the Icelandic Prime Minister, Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir, who is leading a dying coalition of Social Democrats and Left Greens, and she was trying to justify this policy of financial appeasement and fulfillment of the demands of the British and the Dutch, and that's at least $6 billion based on nothing, based on the London and The Hague saying, guess what, we've decided you owe us $6 billion. The Icelanders never signed for this. They never incurred it. This was essentially private bank accounts by private banks with a certain amount of insurance built in, but never the idea that this had been guaranteed by the Icelandic government. So it's a country of 330,000 inhabitants. We did an analysis last week. The GDP is about $12 billion. The British and the Dutch demands are the equivalent of coming to the United States and say, guess what, you owe us $8 trillion. So this is obviously impossible. So hats off to Birgitta Jonsdottir in the Icelandic Parliament this Monday evening, October 5th. This is a night to remember. The electrifying demand for debt moratorium courageously raised by a political leader who is not a professional politician. The origin of Birgitta Jonsdottir and her movement, it's called The Movement, comes out of the mass strike process, which was occurring in Iceland in November, December of 2008, January 2009. This was a process of very frequent demonstrations being held at the parliament, other places around Reykjavik and Iceland. And out of that continuous process of mobilization and ferment came a group called the Civic Movement, and they competed in the elections that were held in January of this year, and in those elections, the existing right-wing government of the Independent Party and the Progressive Party, who were determined to pay derivatives debt and this offshore financial debt, they were thrown out. Unfortunately, in the same process, even though the civic movement won a considerable number of seats, the government was formed by the Social Democrats and by the Left Greens. Now, the Social Democrats are the sinister force in this entire thing. The only policy point known to the Social Democrats is join Europe at all costs, pay $6 billion if that's what you have to do, but get in under the wing of the Eurocrats and Eurogorks of Brussels. This is a bankrupt solution. Those Social Democrats ought to look at what has just happened to the German SPD. The German social democracy has essentially shrunk to its lowest level in about 100 years. The French Socialist Party collapsed earlier in this decade with Jospin when they wouldn't fight for working people. The SPD had imposed the various Hartz austerity programs. That's no good. New Labour, which is the closest party to the Icelandic Social Democrats, the New Labour in Britain with Tony Blair and now Gordon Brown, they're about to collapse too. So I would say to the Social Democrats in Iceland, do you really want to collapse in the same way that your French party, your German party, and your British party already have? Wouldn't it be time to save yourself with a program of economic populism rather than this elitist European vision of getting under the European Central Bank? Now, the civic movement, therefore, won a number of seats, but when it became clear that a significant part of the civic movement was allowing itself to be corrupted by the fleshpots of the system, Birgitte Jonsdottir and two other members of the parliament went and formed a new faction called The Movement, and this is now the distillation of the best tendencies coming out of that mass strike process in Reykjavik over the 3-month period and now beyond, where people are looking back and doing essentially an analysis and assessment of what has happened, what has been accomplished, and what has not been accomplished. Another thing that feeds into this, the Icelandic health minister, Ögmundur Jónasson, Ögmundur Jónasson, is a highly respected leader of the Left Green Party. He's thought to be, at the same time, the most radical and indeed the most honest and reliable of the members of the government. Quit the coalition government with the Social Democrats and the remaining Left Greens. He said, I cannot in good conscience be forced in public to defend economic policies of paying the British and the Dutch at the expense of Iceland's future, because this is a matter of national survival. Ögmundur Jónasson said, I can't get involved in this. I've got to have a free hand and a free conscience, so I will no longer be a minister in the government. I'm quitting the government, and therefore I can speak my mind. Now, this is a man with the look of a statesman, widely regarded as a possible candidate for prime minister. This resignation begins, I think, de facto the government crisis in Iceland, which is quite likely to lead to the collapse of the current Social Democratic Left-Green coalition, perhaps as early as this month of October 2009. Now, the question, therefore, is, here in the United States, what can we do to support the movement, Birgitte Jonsdottir and her friends, who are moving towards a debt moratorium? Let's think of the American interest. The U.S. interest basically is that there should be stability in Iceland, that Iceland should be a prosperous country and not fall under the dominion of demagogues, not be destroyed as a society. If you try to pay this debt, you will destroy the society, destroy the institutions, and open the door to demagogues. Who will control those demagogues? Let's not find out. Let's have the debt moratorium now. We want stability. Iceland controls all the North Atlantic sea lanes. It's part of U.S. national interest. The U.S. should say to the British and the Dutch, get your noses out of Iceland, leave them alone, take care of your own damn banking system, and stop leaning on Iceland. So all support to the friends in Iceland, and we'll be back in a minute.